Hey everybody, I'm Tami Kiefer. I'm a licensed clinical social worker.
And my name is Desiree Grimaldi. Welcome to Unguarded Minds podcast. Today we have a special guest, Joey. He is going to talk to us about some anxiety as an executive business owner and different things that life throws at you. And so we welcome Joey to our podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here.
Yeah. So you own a company. You're in St. Petersburg. You have some stuff that you've learned along the way from your father's trials and tribulations, no pun intended. But you're here to kind of talk to us about some different things as far as like dealing with anxiety, being in business and being a business owner and the pressures, and then maybe touch on some other things that you've learned along the way, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and I think it's just one of those things where it's, you get involved in something and you never quite know exactly how it's going to go. And I think you can say that for any aspect, whether it's, job, relationship, or, starting your own business, for example, or even getting a puppy, we'll call it. But there's lots of different areas that you definitely grow. You try not to burn too many bridges or even try to get burnt. And then, obviously also try to learn from mistakes, and definitely got to see a lot of, great moments. But on the reverse side too, I had some really great inspirational people around me, and I do look forward about chatting about that stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. So how long have you owned your business?
Yeah. So actually right now we're going on about 4 years now. It's been a lot of fun. We actually got a kind of a crazy story of how we got started. Actually, I worked in a high intensity sales position and worked for this company for about 3 years. And, it was one of those things where went jump ship from Missouri, where I was born, and family went through a nasty divorce. And I'm like, I'm going to move to Arizona, and had no really idea what I was getting myself into. Ended up joining a kind of an ad company. And about 3 years into it, I realized we were doing something probably not too ethical. And at least that's what I was thinking. We were up to something. And more or less, I thought, I was a highly commissioned salesperson. So in my mind, I'm losing clients. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to figure out what this was. I think I did technically. And then I actually presented it to my superiors one evening after having a little bit of a liquid courage, and presented this plan. And I really meant it as, hey, look, I think this is the issue. I'm trying to help us. I'm tired of losing clients. You're, on my butt about losing clients. And so, I think I've solved the issue that particularly our reports were not going through accurately. And what I found out later, which I still can't say I was right, but I ended up finding out later, I'm pretty sure there's a margin, some other things built in. And I was actually fired on the spot the next day. I was in North Carolina. And so literally I was super upset, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to name my company. I'm going to start a company that's going to be transparent. And then I'm also going to name my company after an animal that could eat their animal that they were named after. And so I created a media shark.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah.
What a shocker. I mean, and I think that's, well, I would ask you, do you have any regrets? It sounds like maybe you found something that you think was there, but maybe not. Or are you like, it was there and I called them out?
No, it's 100% there. Yeah. The only reason I say I was more hesitant on it, it's just, you always have your doubts about certain aspects for sure. And I think one of the major things was, obviously I didn't have that written on the wall saying, oh, I'm correct about this. But obviously when you fire somebody the next day for trying to make something better, usually it seems like they probably got into something they were not supposed to be stepping around into. And so I'm about 99% sure I was very correct on what my assumptions were that we were doing.
So no regrets.
No, I don't. Well, honestly, no. Just because, if I wouldn't have been fired, I would never led me to opening my own business here and being able to move and joining speaking tours and working with some very large clients. So it was one of those things where obviously there's its own anxiety building the business, but going from fired to kind of almost hired in my own way. Looking back, there's no regrets, but I would say definitely going through it, I regretted or was questioning every little thing around the way, for sure.
We're in the same industry. Like, I've owned a digital marketing SEO company since 2011.
Yep.
There's definitely a lot of shady businesses. We were talking about it right before we jumped on the podcast. Even a lot of these like COVID babies that are starting businesses, and they're just kind of raking it in and hoping it all works out. And it gives us a really bad name, and it's not hard to combat because honesty will always win, but it's frustrating to see nonetheless.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that's the major thing that we kind of have to look at too. It's like, for us even too, I mean, obviously being very similar here, I call them the basically the 25-year-old divorce, coach or, marriage coach. Like no one has, like, a lot of these people that are coming up with these businesses that just popped off, or especially consulting or marketing, they've never really done anything. And so you just see a lot of that too. And I think everybody's just their own YouTube star, and they just don't have a lot of case studies and things like that. But I definitely feel like this industry, marketing in general, is very Wolf of Wall Street, and you really don't know what you're getting. And there's a lot of agencies out there that are just cashing checks and not doing anything, for sure.
Yeah. I usually get them after they work with those companies.
Oh yeah.
I'm on
No,
the other end of it, like not having any marketing experience, not having, I went to school for psychology and to do counseling and therapy. And I was on the other side of it where I would trust people, and spend money and try to, market my business. And that's, thank God I met Desiree, 'cause she helps me with all of that stuff. But there's been plenty of people out there that sell you a beautiful package and don't deliver. And then they're like, sorry, they're very, very scammy, very, very sketchy. So the straightforward, transparent, above board, I really appreciate that.
I tell Tami things she doesn't want to hear all the time. We don't.
I feel like that's most of our job, honestly. In marketing, I'm like, I think my job's more to be the person that's negative, because someone's got to be a voice of reason here and there, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's hard when you're, I mean, even as a marketing expert, I struggle to market my own business. It's so hard when you're so close to it and you're like, no, but this is my mission. I think we have these conversations like, no, this is my mission. I'm like, but nobody knows how to search that mission like that way. Like,
well, and I also think I always tell everybody it's like playing football or something, or a sport in like the top level, because everybody's doing the same things, where you work with third-party businesses that aren't in marketing, and, you're kind of competing against businesses like them and how they think. Whereas marketers are a lot of this time, they're applying the same tools and tactics to their own business. And it gets kind of harder, let alone it's always easier to give advice than it is to be like, okay, I need to sit down and just do this. I keep recommending and preaching it. I should apply it too.
Yeah. It's like the painter whose house needs to be painted for years and years and years.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, we run a ton of ads, and I don't ever run ads per us. And I literally was just talking to somebody the other day. I'm like, I need to just put some on, just because we need to practice what we preach. But
I put in my schedule, I put my business down, like in my project management, as a client. Like that has been helping me. Is like,
that's a good idea.
Hating like everything. I'm like, this isn't mine. It's a client, and I have to treat it as such.
Yeah, no, that's a really good idea.
I see that.
So that's how I've been trying to get better about it. But yeah. So you're obviously a problem solver. You were able to like identify the problem and go from there and figure out what you suspected and ended up being true. Mm. Where did that come from? Like where did those instincts come from? I'm assuming some of that questioning goes back to some other things with like your dad's story.
Yeah. And I think that's one of those things where it's like, I've always been really big into reading. And so I love reading like self-help books. I'm really big into the whole NLP and stuff like that. I'm actually rereading NLP for beginners again. And, or for those who don't know, like neuro-linguistic programming. And, the hard part was like, I think I wasn't sure where it came from. I think technically it had a selfish viewpoint too, because I'm losing clients. And so that was kind of one of those things where I'm like, I could see it in my paycheck. So I definitely wanted to dive into that a little bit. I also wasn't so tied down like some of the other employees who had families and were a little bit more established in the company. I was this 26-year-old kid who's, starting to make six figures, and I'm doing everything I can to hold on to it. But no, I mean, and I think definitely the ethics, or let's say the morals that my parents brought me up on, 100% did that. A little bit, obviously, we're kind of hinting to it. So like my dad served 10 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And he served 10 years for rape, and then was proven innocent completely through DNA testing about 10 years later after he got out. So he served for about 10 years, was able to get out. I was born around that time. And then 2001 comes around, DNA testing comes available to the public. He gets basically proven innocent, takes on the state of Kansas for wrongful conviction, gets an honorable discharge. And, granted, I'm also kind of a kid going through this at the time, so I don't really quite know what's happening. I mean, I think when I really first started realizing it was kind of like mid-level, or like, let's say 8th, 9th grade, all the way into early high school. And then finally he got proven innocent and in 2010. So, seeing someone like that who really pushed boundaries and really didn't or wasn't afraid to question things in certain aspects. Definitely, obviously, he had a whole different fight than me just calling out somebody who had, ethical business issues with and was affecting my paycheck. Versus for him was, fighting for technically his dignity and also for being wrongfully convicted and a pretty much in this situation, very much so, a very messed up justice system. So having someone like that in your back corner who you can rely on, not necessarily in the sense of I want to get advice from, but more like, hey, I can use your story as inspiration to keep pushing myself. And when I think things get bad, I got to remember sometimes that, even now, he technically would still be in prison at my age. And so I got to kind of keep my head on the grind, thinking that, there could be a lot worse things too. So yeah, he's a big motivating factor for a lot of the stuff I do and what pushes me for sure.
Sorry that he went through that, but what he's doing with that is amazing to help other people because our justice system definitely needs some work.
Yeah, no, he's pretty cool. I'll say this: he's on the board for the Innocence Project now. He's actually going to be, I think, next month, depending, I guess, when you're listening to this, but next month he'll be in, I believe, Washington for one of the Innocence Projects. I believe it's Washington's Innocence Project. They're doing a kind of a big party, and he actually gets to play guitar with, I want to say it's, it's Creed or some guitarist from a very large band is actually going to be there. And so he's going to do a song with the guy. So yeah, he's very pumped about that. So yeah, he does a lot of cool stuff.
That's awesome. So that kind of gives us just an insight, for me, I thought on having the courage to kind of push back and really just stand true to your ethics and what you think is right and wrong. And I know that was part of your story, but jumping back to being a business owner, what are some of the stresses that cause anxiety, and how do you push through it? Because owning a business, all three of us own a business. It is super high pressure.
Yep.
We don't get to sit at our desk and have a bad day and have a paycheck at the end of the day. We have to actually work for it every day.
Absolutely.
And not every month is great. So what does that look like for you? Like the stress and the anxiety, and how do you deal with it as a business owner?
Yeah. And kind of like you said, the stresses are very different every time. And I think, there's different levels and walls that happen, as a business owner, as you break through from starting the business, marketing, the general aspect of, bringing on your first employees, all the way to, maintaining, if not exploding into different, call it tier systems or different walls. Each one has its own problems and its own issues, and let alone the issues just never go away either. So, I think one of their big issues, I can say for us specifically, one of the biggest anxieties was, managing the aspect of, the clients too. We're bringing on clients that have very large budgets. We got very blessed the first year we worked with Boost and Sprint until the T-Mobile merger, and then also had some very large Fortune companies that worked with us running ads. And so, not that I had a lot of doubts necessarily for myself, but we had a teammate and some team members that, this is the first time they're running something like this big. And, we're making sure that all the processes and systems are set up where, their managers taking care of them and the clients obviously getting taken care of. And just the aspect of the headaches of the negative things that I'm in my mind, I'm thinking this could go wrong. And just allowing myself to trust, the processes that we put in place was something that was, gave me a ton of anxiety, because again, I'm questioning every little thing that from a coach that's telling me this, from agencies I've seen, to now applying it and seeing it firsthand. That was it was kind of a nightmare. And a lot of times I kind of question too, is are we worth the clients we were bringing on? We got very lucky, and we got, and honestly blessed as well, but our hard work paid off. We definitely were at the level where we should have been, but as a person, on the outside looking into this as a business, it definitely was very, it definitely was very interesting. I'll say that. But I think being able to kind of justify the client's results, being able to see how happy they were, month after month, and then, slowly grow into this thing where it's not just the aspect of maybe, and I don't want to use the word self-doubt by any means, but, the anxiety is starting to kind of trim itself down, because again, it just takes time. And as you see the results come in month and month over, some months are better than others. Obviously, everything has seasonality points to it, but being able to understand that, hey, we're doing something that's really good. And especially when we compare results from other businesses and other agencies, it's like, that kind of opened the door a lot for that mental, let's go mental break, but also mental clarity. So I think the one part I think for managing that anxiety is just, taking a step back and just trusting the processes, even though you don't want to, and just kind of let that time roll up a little bit where you can, go back and see, okay, we are on the right path. And again, we weren't afraid to recorrect if we needed to, but it definitely was, it was just hard from the outside where it's like, you're judging this and you're also involved in it too.
Yeah. Sounds like you're talking a little bit about imposter syndrome and
Sure.
just, second guessing yourself and wondering, what am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? And then you also talked about I just didn't know like what kind of support you had as far as the team that you're working with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess a couple of questions, what'd you learn from the imposter syndrome and feeling that? And what kind of advice would you give to people who also own their own businesses and go through that whole questioning process?
Yeah, and I always hate that imposter syndrome saying, because I'm like, especially when I heard it from the first time I really started digging into it, it makes it sound like you're not worthy of where you're at, and you have to believe that to have that type of symptom situation. And, and I think it's just, sometimes it's a summary of how you feel in certain areas. Like you can, 100% believe you're capable of doing it, but because you don't have enough, let's call reassurance or back end or case studies or enough, let's call it like time in the green, you don't know it's going to work out that way. And so, I think the big thing, especially from a business owner standpoint, it's just, everybody goes through it, and I think people that say they don't are completely wrong personally. There's just no aspect in life where you don't have some type of worry, anxiety, or imposter syndrome in some aspect. It's just one of those things that I think you kind of have to learn to find other people that can help you. One of the biggest things biggest things and best advice I took was from one of my coaches. And he was just like, and this was one of the ones I had early on. He was just like, find somebody who's making where you want to be at in 4 or 5 years in the same business and hang out with them. I'll say this, I didn't look at it like this at the time, but you kind of see their anxiety and what they're going through. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like your problems are way bigger than mine. But at the same time, the way they look at things, they help push you back and say, okay, here's the correction, here's the direction that you need to go. But on top of that, we've already been burnt in our processes, and someone else has already gone through it. Therefore, they're redirecting you, in a certain way that helps you also feel like, that you're on the right path too. So you can avoid that, that imposter syndrome, feeling for as long as you have to, or like, let's say delay it or move past it as fast as you can.
Mm-hmm.
Tony Robbins had said it, and he's like, I remember I worked with him and Dean Graziosi, but
yeah, Dean Graziosi, yeah.
That imposter syndrome is, in his words, bullshit. It is just a buzzword, and it's truly just lack of confidence.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it's not that you're not worthy. It's not, he's like, they just wanted to create a buzzword for it, but it's truly just lack of confidence and fear combined. Mm-hmm. You're afraid of what is going to come from it if you don't succeed, but you're also afraid of it if you do succeed. And so it's just having the confidence to kind of push through and.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's like one of those things where it's like, you hope that you get to be put in positions where you can be tested like that, and I think you have to take a step back and move yourself toward gratitude, in a big area where you should not only, like, I get it that you're going to be stressed, you're going to have anxiety, you'll be, whatever, anxious, and then you'll feel like this imposter syndrome situation, but damn it, you should be really proud that you're in that position, that you get to feel these things. And I think that also makes you kind of come alive a little bit too. If you look at it more of a blessing, then you look at it more of a curse. Because I think, there's certain levels of, they say iron sharpens iron. I believe that's the Psalms. And then, obviously, heat, or, I call it, the lava aspect, but, it forges you into something, and the best pressure creates the best diamonds in a sense. So I think that's, taking that attitude toward, what you're dealing with in the sense of anxiety, or even sometimes, the difficult roadblocks you're facing, is a blessing sometimes in a way, because you should at least look at that. You're happy that you should be happy just enough to be there facing this, because obviously that goal that you had originally led you to getting somewhere close to this area. And so far you're on, potentially the right track.
I think from a logical sense, of course, that totally makes sense,
Sure.
From a logical mindset of just trusting the process, and it's that internal dialogue, and you just can't buy into it, and you can't believe it, and you have to challenge it. And I know when I've got the anxiety brain going on, all that logic just goes right out the window, and it's because your other side of your brain kicks in, and it's all emotion. And you're right. There is no fact-based stuff in anxiety, because it's everything that you're making up in your head, and just how powerful your brain can be as far as believing that and just working yourself into that spiral. So I think that, yeah, whatever you call it, I think it's always trying to challenge that internal dialogue and questioning, like, what's the fact based going on? What facts do I have to back that up?
And I agree 100%, and that's the thing. It's like, you kind of get in the aspect of like, are feelings real? I mean, they're real to me, and,
Uh-huh.
does somebody control my feelings? It's like, no, but do they influence it? And then at the same time, if they influence, who's in control? I mean, technically it should be me,
Yeah.
and it really is. But I
Yeah.
also think that's why it's so important to create the structure around you and be so, in tune with what voices are coming from and who's telling you what. And, are those people in your life actually encouraging you to go down the path you're in? Because a lot of times I think that's the hardest part, is where you're fighting something internally and you're just wishing for somebody to agree with you and tell you you're doing the right thing, or tell you that the problem's going to be resolved here shortly. And a lot of times you're kind of, especially as an entrepreneur, you're very much by yourself in your own head. And I think that's one of those aspects of having, a close group of people, if not, don't always say coaches, because I think I got burnt out on coaches personally, but having the right structure around you 100%.
Mm-hmm.
I think the coaching industry is more toxic than any of them right now.
Yes, they're the marriage coaches that are 25 years old that are given. Yeah.
Even some of the other ones though, like I had it was my first coach, and I knew from the beginning, I was like, we do not align.
Yep.
And I went against my judgment and found out the hard way. But I think a lot of it too is just, I completely lost my train of thought.
The coaching business and trusting your coach, and you got burned out on coaches.
Yeah, so I think like part of it is you see a lot of people online, and I've had this conversation with some networking friends or whatever, but you see them go online and they go, oh, the economy sucks and everything's terrible and everything's this. And I'm like, because that's all you're looking for. Like, that's who you're surrounding yourself with. You're surrounding yourself with the people who are going, there's no way to make money. Nobody has money. No businesses are hiring. Where if you go to the people who aren't getting wrapped up in the negativity and aren't posting those things and they're sharing their wins, then that's what you're going to see. But you're choosing which path you want to see things on. And a lot of times my response is go outside and touch some fucking grass, because you're too caught up in whatever is on the computer.
Well, and so actually, I went through a little breakup here recently with a girlfriend, and we dated for 2.5 years, and we couldn't be any more opposite in some of the negativity. It's not negative. It's just we look at life so differently. And it was just one of those aspects of relationship was that, I'm fighting this battle with the business, and I really don't get into I do, but I don't. But some of the outside interference, such as what's going on with friends in, Facebook, what's going on with politics in certain areas, Fox News, CNN, or wherever you get your news, I didn't have the depth, not say the depth to also absorb it, but we're hitting so many roadblocks in just certain aspects that it was just one of those aspects where I just knew like where the path I wanted and where I wanted to go, it didn't have certain aspects that this relationship had. And so that was kind of one of those decisions I made. But again, it's, I'm not saying she counts for this necessarily, but there's a massive area, like you're completely right, where you have to cut out a lot of stuff. Because again, it's like having a clean glass of water, and, your mind's already, making it dirty. But if you're getting all this other outside toxic, let's call it liquids being poured into you, weirdly enough, it'll overwhelm you to the point now, like you're saying, you start falling down that same path as well, where you wouldn't have if you wouldn't have them in your life sometimes as well.
Yeah, it's true. I had to call Tami, and I was like, I have this thought, but I don't know if I should post it online.
I got to be careful on those too. I get kind of motivated, and I'm like,
oh yeah, because I stay away from any hot topics. I just don't feel like a business has an opinion, and so I don't post anything. But it was, my husband brought it to me, and he was like, somebody from 30 years ago said something terrible to me in an assumption. And he goes, Desiree, do you realize, like, if it wasn't for social media, we would have naturally outgrown those people. Like, we would have never seen them again. They would have never been in our life. But because of social media, we're holding on to like so much of the past and letting it shift us, and our views have changed and our thoughts have changed and all these things in our life have changed, but we're holding on to that past where it's literally limiting us from growing as much as we're naturally supposed to. And shedding the things that we're naturally supposed to.
Well, you kind of think of the aspect of even the herding mentality. I mean, we as people, like, we want to be in a herd so bad, and we want to be around the right people. We look at friends, family, things like that, and this group of connectivity. But I always think sometimes it's like, what if you're a zebra, hanging out with a bunch of, hippos or giraffes, and vice versa? and you don't realize it. And sometimes your Facebook community can be just like that. Same thing. I always say this in marketing too, because I'm like, what if you're running ads and you're running this ad to a bunch of giraffes and really you have elephants as your clients? There's a lot of issues like this that happen. But I really think when it comes down to your networking, your groups, your friends and family, you have to look at who you are and where you want to be, let alone also more importantly, almost who do you want to exclude. But Facebook's one of those, Instagram, I don't know, TikTok. I mean, all these social media platforms, they do create ability to seem like you're still connected when in reality, a lot of times you're not, but because they show up frequently enough, we kind of believe this pseudo friendship or connectivity.
Yeah. So are you, it kind of sounds like if just going back to just being authentic to who you are. And if you're trying to reach people who just really aren't your people, then maybe that's where the confidence piece comes into it also, because you're just going against a brick wall, or you're trying to, is that kind of what you're talking about? Where you're trying to, just like you're trying to get out there and you're trying to, as a business owner, you're trying to reach a certain population, but then you're like, okay, well, I could change myself a little bit to fit into this, or I could change myself a little bit to fit into that. And in that changing process, I've definitely felt like that, where I'm like, God, I'm losing myself. I have to get back to my people, my clients, who I'm wanting to reach. And is that kind of what you're talking about?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, yeah, especially when it comes to, they always say from the ad standpoint, the elephant, the giraffe aspect. But no, I think that was one of those, just kind of even expanding on that. I mean, whether I was kind of saying that, or a little bit like that, one of the biggest things I think as business owners or businesses, you make a big mistake on is not niching down and knowing your clients. That causes a lot of issues and causes a lot of problems. And so again, going back to that group you're supposed to be around, there's also those amount of clients that you should be around. The more spread out you are, where they say, you can be a mile long and an inch thick, or you could be an inch wide and a mile deep, however that goes. Yeah. But, but there's also a lot of opportunity for problems within that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's, maybe that margin of error on each side is what you pay attention to. I mean, because
again, I think it goes back to too, like what we were saying, like what you think your audience should be and what it's like. I listened to one marketing person that I follow, and she was like, you have to find, like, whatever it is you're doing, like, you have to find that there's at least a few $1 million in that industry, like, circulating. If you're looking and that industry like barely works, or they're like stay-at-home moms, or you know what I mean, then there's not money. They're not investing into things, like, even though that might be who you feel like need or want or would thrive with the information. If there's no circulating finances there, then it's not going to return back to your business. And so she was talking about a lot of people like reaching homeschooling moms and things like that. Like there's no finances there. So you trying to sell them a high ticket program isn't gonna fly very well.
That would definitely be hard. Well, and I think that's the other thing too. It's, if you spend, I mean, every message that we have in life, it's, I mean, even probably the ones even happening with us mentally, or, let's call it pulling at our strings of our heart, all the way down to the marketing that makes us want to buy the cheeseburger as we drive past whatever McDonald's or Burger King. It's usually built on two aspects of, some type of, instant gratification. It's built on fear or a sense of urgency. And so, as long as you're aware of what those three things are pulling at you at any given time, you can usually sometimes even figure out even better why you do certain actions and, how you're being marketed to, maybe even mentally too, by yourself. But I think, especially when it comes to business owners, if you have a generic message with a generic, call to action or a generic offer that is literally embedded, one of those three aspects, but it's generic, it's going to look very different. That may not solve the need of that, very niche down client that you want to go after. And we get a lot of clients that, I'll say they come to us with anxiety of like, we have this, and in their mind, it's like, we have this message, we have this product, the service, whatever. And, you just realize that their messaging is just not correct for that type of audience, that they claim is their clients or they think is their client. And they find out, that's definitely not.
But I'm sure that breaks away people's confidence when they start out, because what they think and how they envision it, and they're doing it and they're staying true to themselves and they're hitting brick walls versus, kind of looking at all the different marketing aspects, I guess.
Well, and I mean, if we really think about it, I mean, there's a lot of businesses that just and I hate saying this, but they flat out fail. I mean, you got to be realistic about, if I'm going to go into business with myself, there's only so much I can do mentally and physically and get myself into preparation, let alone you can only put together so much of a business plan and so much of a marketing aspect and all this stuff. But if you don't have something to serve and give into a community that needs or wants, and especially going back to the dollar aspect, there's only so much you can do. But again, there's so many elements of this, from the mental, the spiritual, the physical, to the actual implementation, to the delivery and, satisfaction of the customer, that there's a reason why there's a lot of businesses that just fail outright. And I do actually think a lot of it goes back to the mental aspect. I don't think people realize how hard it's going to be, and how many people that you will push away on accident, or you have to, let alone, kind of like we were saying earlier, there's a lot of times where, you don't know if you're going to be technically getting fed in certain areas, but at the same time, you have to also be prepared to store when when it's, pouring and growing.
Yeah. How do you deal with the anxiety of your clients? Like, I know I have one that I love them all, but I have one that, like, they did 500,000 last month, and this month isn't as great.
Yeah.
And like the world is collapsing. Like, how do you
Yeah,
I go back to that, like, storing, because it was a really good month and it's a sales industry. So I'm like, it fluctuates. Like, this is normal. Yeah. But I mean, those clients do. They call, like, the end of the world is happening. And
I literally have my screen right here, and I have a client that oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
That's okay.
No, I have it literally at my screen right here to the left, and I don't think the camera can see it, but I keep looking over, and I have a client that I normally don't let them text me. That's one of my rules, is especially if you want to manage your anxiety, don't let your clients text you, because their problems will become your problem because they are a problem. But I should get that tattooed somewhere, because that's, yeah. But no, I think one of the issues that I'll say from that standpoint is, I have this client kind of similar in this way, is they were spending money on Google ads, and it's not a lot, but for them it is. And I don't want to judge that. I don't want to say what their numbers were, but they were a lot lower than what, and I'm sure you see this all the time. They come in, they're like, oh, we spend 25, 30, 40,000 a month. And a lot of our clients do spend that amount. We have some over the six figures. But to be transparent, we typically are very hesitant when we have a client that comes in that spends, $2,000, $3,000 a month, because we just know we're very limited in our reach, the amount of campaigns, what we're trying to accomplish. And on top of that, they expect the world. They were super cool. I really enjoy working with them. They're a husband and wife couple, and they're restarting their business from scratch. And they just kind of hit home when I was talking to them. And as we started working together, it's like, okay, this is great. They're texting me literally right now saying, hey, we were about to do this large order for some of this marketing package that they want. And they had some budget left over. It's, literally almost at the end of the month. And they go, hey, can we roll that over into this new package? Which we don't do. We associate everything. This is what we ordered. This is what we're doing. And I can tell that they don't like this, and it's giving them anxiety of, it's not the end of the month yet and all this stuff. And I'm, my thing is, I think it's one of those things that you just have to realize it. You have to be firm in your foundation and who you are as a business. If you start buckling for every single person and you start changing things because you try to be unique to this situation, well, it's weird that these situations that you're trying to be unique to keep happening over and over again, or at least keep coming up again. One of the big things that we kind of did for us specifically is, and I think everybody, especially if you're in the digital world, and something like that, but the product world's hard for sure. But I mean, making sure your contracts are in place. I mean, you really got to make sure that you put the right foundations in. Obviously, make sure the expectations are there. And 2 or 3, don't let them have your cell phone number. That's a big one. But I mean, unless they're really cool. But I don't know. I always find out later that they
text back and forth at like 2 a.m.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Tami, I don't have a lot of people in my life like that. They're like, literally, I'm not exaggerating. My sister's fiance forwarded a lead. Well, they told somebody about me, and they're in California. I'm in Florida. And I get a text last night. Luckily, I was on sleep mode, but I wake up at like 4:30 and I see this text saying, hey, can you dive into this? And I'm like, oh, what client is this? Like, it's at 4:30 in the morning. And of course, it was like somebody who they got a referral through a family. So they didn't know anything, but I'm like, gosh, nobody should have my number. But yeah, I really think the managing anxiety with client wise is, making sure they have a very clear outline of what is the expectations, what's the timeline, where this could go wrong, things that you're responsible for, things that they're responsible for. But at the same time, I kind of hate saying this. You kind of have to be the dick or an asshole. And if they start bucking in certain areas because, it's not going the way they want, you kind of have to just say, this is how it goes sometimes, especially when it goes to seasonality. And in fact, a lot of them know that better than we know it as marketers. They know when they're supposed to be down. And if their numbers are up in May and they're a chiropractor and it's February and, they're about to go into a small, little slow lump, they don't get the numbers that they hit in May happening now, no matter what you do. Because, obviously the buyer, intent is not there anymore. Now come, May or April, May, yeah, sure, that'll turn around. And I think that's one of those things where you just have to be so confident in that you know what you're doing. You can't allow their nervousness or their anxiety to reflect back on you in your decision. And because they can feel it and they can smell it technically, a mile away.
I was thinking it just as a psychotherapist. I mean, it's similar. People will come to you guys as marketers. People will come to me as a therapist to find some safety in some sense. I'm getting ready to write you a huge check, or I'm getting ready, I want to know, is this a safe place? So I think you're right. Like having boundaries, being authentic to yourself, being transparent. I mean, just being a good human can actually go a really long way. And you'll probably, maybe you guys find it, but I'll get more clients just being an authentic person. And I'm not going to lie to my clients if I don't, I'm not going to tell someone I think that you should get divorced, but I'll also say, like, why are you guys still together? Like, what are you doing? What are you expecting? What are you hoping to get out of this?
Well, I think it's like with you, it's like if a client comes to you and they're like, by next Friday, I want my anxiety gone.
Yeah.
Good luck.
And I'm paying you to do it.
Right.
Yeah, bye.
And then comes the boundaries, and there comes the transparency, and there comes the conversation of,
but
all
I
of
think
those things.
Marketing, it's kind of like if they spoke to another therapist before you and that therapist guaranteed it. And they guaranteed it for less money than you.
Yeah.
And so now it's like we're being authentic because we've been in the business and this is literally our livelihood. It's not a hobby that, we plan on making $1 million overnight with. But I think that's some of what we're experiencing is like, well, this person said they could do 10 times that for half the price. And it's like,
all the time.
Yeah.
Call me in 3 months when nothing's been done.
Well,
go give it a shot. Go dip your toe in. Go see how that works, and then let me know if I can help you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's the key, though, right there is like one thing that we're kind of almost saying, but we're not saying. It's like, you have to become the, authority in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean in the sense of like that, you are, but this is where your moment is to show them that this is why you're working with me. It's not about, getting X amount of leads, because here, let me show you where they lied already in these other areas. Mm-hmm. So if they misinterpreted that data or did lie, whatever, and I hate saying that, but a lot of them do, or they overestimated and underdelivered, whatever you want to call it, or over, maybe more on your side, Tami, where it's like, well, I expected to be healed, repaired, and super man or woman by, by whatever the third meeting. It's like, oh, fantastic. Well, here's all the other things that, that don't work quite like that. So why would we have this expectation? Let alone, because actually I was speaking to somebody on a podcast a while back, and I think she was working in therapy or something like that. I don't remember what it was exactly, but it was something related. She might actually be the therapist herself. I can't remember what she said, but she literally goes, I had somebody, or I heard a story. Someone came in and they were talking about how they were expecting to be healed because a friend got, recovering super fast by something tragic in just like a couple meetings. And then this other lady was saying that, she wanted to leave, this system that they're in, or this, whatever they call it, the therapy aspect that she was taking with this lady, because she didn't get the same result as fast. And so, it's one of those things where it's like every single person has like so many different expectations. And it's like especially as a business owner, or in general, you have to literally be wearing this authority cap at all given times, because you just don't know how they're going to twist something, or let alone you don't know what they've been told. So they hold on to expectations walking into it, thinking that they're the authority and they're there to check you. And you almost have to be on like this wide, I call this, pivot machine at all given times, because, you don't know where you're going to have to pivot at.
Yeah.
So
it's an interesting business, especially as an entrepreneur. There's many, many, many facets to taking care of yourself, taking care of your clients. Yeah. Yeah,
no, absolutely. Sorry, and I'm working from home today, so I have the dog in the other room, and he's going through a little leg injury, so he's not very happy. I know he can hear me. Yeah, so
Oh.
such a pain. Yeah,
Yeah,
love being a
maybe.
dog parent.
She has just had surgery too.
I know, mine's sitting here with her bodysuit on because I hate the cone.
Yep. Well, he went through kind of like this whole thing, and he has to wear like this like pajama looking thing. It's like almost like
Yeah.
he got the shirt cut and the arms
Yeah.
there,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it drives him up the wall. And I know it's just like, I'm like, dude, I'm gonna drug you with more CBD. I swear to God.
I should do the CBD.
Oh,
Yeah.
my dogs, that's what we have to do for the drive. They have
Oh,
like
yeah.
get fevers in the car within 5 minutes. And I'm
Oh,
like,
no, I feel you on that. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I was going to say thank you so much for being on here today. I know we got to kind of wrap it up a little bit, but I think that, just what you're saying as far as an entrepreneur and where you come from, sounds like you've had a ton of resiliency lessons in your life and just, whether it was your dad getting through what he did, your family going through it, getting fired or whatever you call it from this job that really gave you way more opportunity. There's a lot of resilience that goes behind that. So I think that
Sure.
gives hope for people. And I appreciate you talking about all that.
Yeah, no, thank you guys so much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
absolutely. Yeah. We're going to go ahead and link your Instagram when we release this so that people can go ahead and follow you. And it was so great talking to you.
Perfect. Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
All right. You too. Thanks.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.